The bright studio lights felt almost unbearably hot as 17-year-old. Emma Chen stood backstage at the Grand Performance Hall. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her violin case. Watching the previous contestant leave the stage with tears streaming down their face. The famous television show, Classical Stars, had a reputation for being brutal, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to witness. Maestro Viktor Rostov sat in the center judge's chair like a king on his throne. His silver hair was perfectly combed back, and his expensive tailored suit reflected his status as one of the world's most celebrated conductors. For 40 years, he had led the finest orchestras across Europe and America. His word could make or break a young musician's career. The other two judges seemed almost invisible beside him, rarely speaking unless Victor allowed them to. Emma had been playing violin since she was 5 years old. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but hope and determination. They worked double shifts at their small restaurant to afford her lessons. Every spare dollar went toward her education and her instrument. The violin she carried had been her grandfather's, brought over from the old country. It wasn't expensive or fancy, but it sang with a warmth that newer instruments couldn't match. She had practiced for this moment every single day for the past 6 months. Her fingers had developed new calluses. Her shoulders ached from the hours spent perfecting each note. Her younger brother complained about hearing the same pieces over and over through their thin apartment walls. But Emma never stopped. This competition was her chance to earn a scholarship to the prestigious Conservatory of Music. Without it, her dream of becoming a professional violinist would remain just that, a dream. The production assistant motioned for her to get ready. Through the gap in the curtain, Emma could see Victor leaning back in his chair, looking bored. He had just finished criticizing the previous performer, a talented cellist from Boston, telling her that she played like a robot with no soul. The girl had run off stage, sobbing. Emma's stomach twisted into knots. Next contestant, Emma Chen, the announcer's voice boomed through the hall. She's 17 years old from San Francisco, and she'd be performing Paganini's Caprice No. 24. Emma walked onto the stage, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. The audience of 300 people seemed to multiply before her eyes. She had performed in recitals before, but never anything like this. Never with cameras pointing at her from every angle. Never with millions of people watching from their homes. Never with someone like Viktor Rostov waiting to judge her every move. She positioned herself at the center mark on the stage floor. The violin felt heavier than usual as she lifted it to her shoulder. She took a deep breath and looked out at the judges. Victor was already frowning, his arms crossed over his chest. He hadn't even heard her play yet, and he already looked disappointed. Paganini's 24th Caprice, Victor said slowly, his thick accent making each word sound important. Do you know how many young violinists think they can play this piece? Do you know how many fail? Emma's throat went dry. I've been preparing for 6 months, sir. 6 months, Victor repeated with a cold laugh. I spent 6 years mastering Paganini. But please show us what 6 months of practice looks like. The audience murmured uncomfortably. The other judges shifted in their seats but said nothing. Emma felt heat rising to her cheeks. She wanted to run off stage like the cellist before her. She wanted to disappear. But then she thought of her parents watching from the audience. She thought of every sacrifice they had made. She thought of her grandfather's violin in her hands. She raised her bow and began to play. The opening notes rang out clear and strong. Her fingers moved across the strings with precision she had drilled into them through countless hours of practice. The piece was incredibly difficult, featuring rapid finger work and complex techniques that had broken many professional violinists. But Emma had studied every recording she could find. She had analyzed every performance. She knew this piece like she knew her own heartbeat. For the first 30 seconds, everything went perfectly. Her vibrato was controlled. Her intonation was spot on. She could feel the music flowing through her, the way it always did when she played her best. The audience leaned forward in their seats. Even the cameramen seemed entranced. Then Victor raised his hand. "Stop!" he commanded. Emma's bow froze mid-stroke. The sudden silence felt deafening. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. "What are you doing?" Victor asked, standing up from his chair. He walked toward the stage, his shoes clicking against the floor with each step. Do you think Paganini wrote this piece so that little girls could play it at talent shows? I'm sorry, I don't understand, Emma managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Your technique is adequate, Victor said, the word adequate dripping with contempt. But you play without understanding, without passion, without the fire that Paganini demands. You are just moving your fingers and hoping for the best. Emma felt like she had been slapped. She had poured her heart into those notes. Every single one had meaning to her. I was trying to honor the composition, she said quietly. Honor? Victor laughed harshly. You cannot honor what you do not understand. This piece requires a maturity you do not possess. It requires experience you have not lived. You are wasting everyone's time with this performance. The audience gasped. One of the other judges, a kind-looking woman named Margaret, opened her mouth to speak, but Victor silenced her with a glare. Emma stood frozen on stage, humiliation washing over her in waves. The cameras captured every moment of her embarrassment. Millions of people were watching her dream crumble on live television. Her parents sat in the audience, their faces etched with pain and anger at seeing their daughter treated this way. But Victor wasn't finished. In fact, he continued, turning to address the audience, I will tell you something I have never told anyone publicly before. When I was 19, just 2 years older than this girl, I attempted to perform Paganini's 24th Caprice at an important audition in Moscow. Do you know what happened? The hall was silent, everyone waiting for his next words. I failed, Victor said simply. I failed because I was not ready. I was too young, too inexperienced, too foolish to understand what the piece demanded. The judges told me to come back when I had lived more life, when I had something real to say with my music. I was humiliated, but they were right. It took me 6 more years before I could truly play Paganini the way he deserves. He turned back to Emma, his expression hard. You are making the same mistake I did. But unlike me, you do not have the excuse of being a prodigy. You are simply an average student playing above your level. Emma felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. She looked down at her grandfather's violin, thinking about all the dreams it had carried across the ocean, all the hopes her family had placed in her. Then something changed inside her. The fear and humiliation transformed into something else, something stronger. She lifted her head and looked Victor straight in the eyes. Emma's voice came out steady and clear, surprising even herself. May I finish my performance? Victor's eyebrows rose. Nobody had ever challenged him like this on his own show. The audience held their breath. The camera zoomed in closer, sensing that something unexpected was happening. You want to continue embarrassing yourself? Victor asked, a mocking smile playing on his lips. I want to finish what I started, Emma replied. Her hands had stopped shaking. The fear that had gripped her moments ago was gone, replaced by a calm determination. You said you failed at this piece when you were 19. I'm only 17. Maybe I'll fail too. But I'd rather fail trying than stop because someone told me I wasn't good enough. Margaret, the other judge, suddenly spoke up. I think we should let her finish. Everyone deserves to complete their audition. The third judge, a retired pianist named Thomas, nodded in agreement. The rules of the competition state that each contestant gets 3 minutes. She's only played for 30 seconds. Victor's jaw tightened. He was used to having complete control. But with the cameras rolling and the other judges supporting Emma, he had no choice. He waved his hand dismissively. Fine, continue. Show us all how you waste the rest of your time. He walked back to his seat, settling into his chair with his arms crossed. His expression made it clear he expected nothing but disappointment. Emma positioned her violin again. But this time, something was different. The pressure she had felt before was gone. She had already been humiliated. She had already been told she wasn't good enough. There was nothing left to lose. And in that freedom, she found something she hadn't expected. She closed her eyes and let herself feel the music. When she began to play again, it was like a different person had taken the stage. The notes that came from her violin weren't just technically correct anymore. They were alive. They sang and cried and laughed. Her bow danced across the strings with a confidence that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside her. Emma thought about her grandfather, who had played this same violin in the streets of Taipei to earn money for food. She thought about her parents, working until midnight at the restaurant so she could chase her dreams. She thought about every moment of struggle, every sacrifice, every late-night practice session when her fingers bled and her arms ached. All of that pain and love and hope poured out through her music. The technical passages that had seemed so difficult before now flowed effortlessly. Her fingers flew across the fingerboard with impossible speed, hitting every note with crystal clarity. The variations that Paganini had written to showcase virtuosity became more than just showing off. They became a story, a journey, a conversation between the violin and everyone listening. The audience forgot to breathe. Cameramen stopped adjusting their equipment and just watched. Even the production staff, who had seen hundreds of performances, stood mesmerized. And Viktor Rostov's expression slowly began to change. His arms uncrossed. He leaned forward in his chair. The mocking smile disappeared from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like shock. His eyes widened as Emma navigated through passages that professional violinists struggled with. She wasn't just playing the notes. She was transforming them into something magical. Emma reached the most difficult section of the piece, a series of left-hand pizzicatos combined with bowed notes that required playing two separate lines simultaneously. Most violinists her age couldn't even attempt it. But Emma's fingers moved with absolute certainty. Each plucked note rang out clear and bright while her bow maintained the melodic line. It was like watching one person play two instruments at once. Margaret gripped the armrest of her chair, tears forming in her eyes. Thomas sat with his mouth slightly open, completely transfixed. And Victor, the man who had seen everything in his 40-year career, looked like he was witnessing something he couldn't quite believe. As Emma approached the final variation, she opened her eyes. She looked directly at Victor, and played the last section with a fire and intensity that seemed impossible from someone so young. Every note was a declaration. Every phrase was a statement. She wasn't just playing Paganini. She was conquering him. The final chord rang out through the hall, pure and strong and absolutely perfect. For a moment, there was complete silence. Emma lowered her violin, breathing hard. Her heart raced from the physical exertion of the piece. Sweat beaded on her forehead. But she stood tall, her eyes never leaving Victor's face. Then the audience erupted. People jumped to their feet, applauding and cheering. Some were crying openly. Others were hugging the strangers next to them. The sound of their appreciation was deafening. It rolled through the hall like thunder, growing louder and louder. The applause went on for almost 2 full minutes, with no sign of stopping. Margaret was the first judge to stand, clapping enthusiastically with tears streaming down her face. Thomas followed, shaking his head in amazement. They both turned to look at Victor, waiting for his response. Victor sat perfectly still in his chair. His hands rested on the armrests. His face was unreadable. The silence from his direction created a tension that cut through even the audience's celebration. Finally, he stood up. The crowd gradually quieted, everyone waiting to hear what the famous maestro would say. Emma braced herself for more criticism. She had played her heart out, but she knew that Victor could still tear her performance apart if he wanted to. He had the knowledge and experience to find flaws that nobody else would notice. Victor walked to the front of the judges' table. He looked at Emma for a long moment, his expression still impossible to read. Then he did something that nobody expected. He began to clap. It was slow at first, his hands coming together deliberately. But there was something in the gesture that made everyone understand this wasn't sarcastic or mocking. This was genuine appreciation from a man who rarely gave it. "I was wrong," Victor said simply. The audience gasped. In 15 seasons of Classical Stars, Viktor Rostov had never admitted to being wrong about anything. "I judged you before you finished," he continued, his accent making the admission sound even more significant. "I saw a young girl with an old violin, and I thought I knew what I would hear. But you did not play like a young girl. You played like someone who has lived 1,000 lives through music." Emma felt her knees go weak with relief. She gripped her violin tighter to keep from collapsing. That passage in the final variation, Victor said, his voice taking on a tone of professional respect. The triple stops combined with the harmonic progression. I have heard celebrated virtuosos struggle with that section. You played it perfectly. Not just the notes, but the meaning behind them. He paused, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say next. When I was 19 and failed my audition in Moscow, Victor continued, his voice dropping lower, I played the piece exactly as I had practiced it. Every note was correct. Every dynamic was precise. But I had no soul in my playing because I was terrified of making mistakes. I was so focused on being perfect that I forgot to be human. He walked closer to the stage, stopping just a few feet from where Emma stood. You did the opposite. When I stopped you, when I humiliated you in front of all these people, you could have let that fear control you. Instead, you let it go. And in letting go of the fear, you found something that took me years to discover. You found your voice. The hall was so quiet that Emma could hear her own heartbeat. Victor's words felt surreal, like she was living in a dream. I told you that you were making the same mistake I made, Victor said. But I was wrong again. You are not making my mistake. You are doing what I should have done. You are playing with courage. Margaret wiped her eyes with a tissue. Thomas nodded enthusiastically. The audience watched this unprecedented moment unfold before them. I have one question for you, Victor said to Emma. Where did you learn to play like that? Which teacher has been working with you? Emma felt her face flush. This was the part she had been dreading. I've had different teachers over the years, she said quietly. But for the past 2 years, I've been teaching myself mostly. My parents couldn't afford private lessons anymore, so I learned from watching videos online and practicing what I saw. A murmur ran through the audience. Victor's expression shifted to something like disbelief. You taught yourself that technique? Those interpretations? He asked. I watched recordings of great violinists, Emma explained. I studied how they moved, how they approached difficult passages. I read everything I could find about Paganini and his music. I practiced 6, sometimes 8 hours a day, trying to understand what made those performances special. Victor stood silent for a moment, processing this information. Then he turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, in my 40 years of conducting, I have worked with students from the finest conservatories in the world. I have trained musicians who had private tutors from the age of 3. I have seen prodigies who had every advantage money could buy. He turned back to Emma. This girl had none of those advantages. And yet she has just given one of the most remarkable performances of Paganini I have witnessed in a decade. The audience applauded again, but Victor raised his hand for silence. However, he said, and Emma's heart sank. She knew there had to be a however. However, I cannot in good conscience give you high marks for this audition. Confusion rippled through the hall. Margaret and Thomas looked at Victor with surprise and disapproval. You see, Victor continued, I stopped you. I interrupted your performance and broke your concentration. The rules of the competition state that if a judge interferes with a contestant's performance, that contestant must be given the opportunity to audition again with a fresh start. It would be unfair to judge you on a performance that I myself disrupted. He looked directly into Emma's eyes. I am offering you something I have never offered any contestant in 15 seasons of this show. I am asking you to return next week and perform again. Not because you failed, but because I did. And this time I promise you I will listen from the first note to the last without interruption. Emma couldn't believe what she was hearing. A second chance. But, more than that, an admission from Victor Rostov that he had been wrong. That she deserved better treatment than he had given her. There is one condition, Victor added. You must prepare a different piece. Something that showcases your abilities in a new way. Do you accept? Emma nodded, not trusting herself to speak. Tears were streaming down her face now, but they were tears of joy and relief. Then I will see you next week, Victor said. He extended his hand to her. Emma carefully set down her violin and bow, then stepped forward to shake his hand. His grip was firm and warm. Up close, she could see that his eyes were wet too. As Emma left the stage, the audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted even longer than the first. Her parents rushed to meet her backstage, wrapping her in a tight embrace. Her mother was sobbing. Her father kept saying how proud he was, over and over again. The video of Emma's performance went viral within hours. By the next morning, it had been viewed more than 10 million times. People shared it with comments about how she had handled Victor's harsh criticism with grace. How she had turned humiliation into triumph. How she had proved that talent and determination could overcome any obstacle. Music schools from around the country started reaching out. Scholarship offers arrived by email and phone. Violin teachers wanted to work with her. Suddenly, the future that had seemed so impossible just yesterday was opening up before her eyes. But Emma remained focused. She had 1 week to prepare a new piece for Victor and the judges. 1 week to prove that her first performance wasn't just a lucky moment, but a genuine display of her abilities. She thought long and hard about what to play. It needed to be challenging enough to showcase her technical skills. But it also needed to be something she could connect with emotionally, the way she had connected with Paganini. After considering dozens of options, she finally chose a piece that felt right. Sarasate's Carmen Fantasy. It was based on themes from Bizet's opera Carmen, and it required not just technical brilliance but also a sense of drama and storytelling. The piece moved through different moods and characters, from playful to tragic to triumphant. Emma threw herself into preparation. She listened to Carmen dozens of times, learning the story and the emotions of each character. She practiced until her fingers moved automatically, until she could play the most difficult passages, while thinking about the meaning behind them instead of worrying about the notes. Her story had inspired thousands of young musicians around the world. Messages poured in from kids who said Emma had given them courage to keep pursuing their dreams. Parents wrote to thank her for showing their children that hard work and passion mattered more than expensive advantages. But Emma tried not to think about any of that. She couldn't let the pressure of expectations weigh her down. She had to approach this second performance the same way she had approached the end of her first one, with freedom and honesty and the willingness to share her true self through the music. The week passed in a blur of practice and media attention. News outlets wanted interviews. Classical music blogs wrote articles analyzing her performance. Even some famous violinists commented publicly, praising her technique and musicality. Through it all, Emma stayed grounded. She remembered where she came from. She remembered her parents' sacrifices. She remembered playing in their small apartment with thin walls, hoping she wasn't disturbing the neighbors but unable to stop because the music demanded to be played. The night before her second performance, Emma couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind racing through the Carmen Fantasy over and over. Every note, every bow stroke, every shift in position. She had practiced so much that her shoulders ached and her fingertips were raw despite the calluses she had developed over years of playing. Around 2 a.m, she gave up on sleep and went to the small living room of their apartment. Her grandfather's violin rested in its case on the table. She opened it carefully, running her fingers along the worn wood. The instrument had traveled across an ocean, survived poverty and hardship, and somehow ended up in her hands. It felt like destiny, though Emma wasn't sure she believed in such things. She picked up the violin and began to play quietly, not wanting to wake her family. The Carmen Fantasy flowed from her fingers, soft and gentle in the darkness. Playing it like this, without pressure or audience, reminded her why she loved music in the first place. It wasn't about competitions or scholarships or impressing famous conductors. It was about the pure joy of creating something beautiful. Her mother appeared in the doorway, wrapped in her old bathrobe. She didn't say anything, just sat on the couch and listened. When Emma finished, her mother spoke in Mandarin, their shared language of home and heart. "Your grandfather would be so proud," she said softly. "He always said that music was the one thing nobody could take from you. Not poverty, not hardship, not even death. The music lives on." Emma sat beside her mother, resting her head on her shoulder like she had when she was a little girl. "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I can't do it again? What if last week was just luck?" Her mother took her hand. "Luck is when preparation meets opportunity. You have prepared more than anyone could ask. Now you just need to trust yourself the way we trust you." Those words stayed with Emma through the restless remainder of the night and into the morning. When she arrived at the grand performance hall that evening, she felt calmer than she expected. The same bright lights glared down. The same cameras pointed at the stage, the same 300 seats filled with people eager to see what would happen. But this time was different. This time Emma walked onto the stage with her head held high. She had nothing to prove to Viktor Rostov or anyone else. She only had to be honest with herself and true to the music. Viktor sat in his judge's chair looking more serious than usual. The viral video of their previous encounter had made international news. Music critics had written think pieces about his harsh judging style and whether it helped or hurt young musicians. Some supported his tough love approach, arguing that the classical music world demanded excellence. Others condemned him for publicly humiliating a teenager. The pressure was on him as much as it was on Emma. Margaret smiled warmly at Emma as she took her position on stage. Thomas gave her an encouraging nod. Viktor remained expressionless, his hands folded in front of him. Emma Chen returns to perform for us tonight, the announcer said. She'd be playing Sarasate's Carmen Fantasy. Emma lifted her violin. She closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. Then she began. The opening notes were playful and flirtatious, capturing Carmen's seductive character from the opera. Emma's bow danced across the strings with a lightness that made the music sparkle. She swayed slightly as she played, her body moving naturally with the rhythm. The piece shifted into the famous habanera theme. The aria where Carmen sings about love being like a rebellious bird that cannot be tamed. Emma's interpretation was sultry and confident, her vibrato adding warmth to each note. The technical demands were immense, requiring rapid string crossings and perfect intonation across multiple positions. But Emma made it seem effortless. Viktor leaned forward, his eyes never leaving her. There was no mockery in his expression now. Only intense concentration. The music transformed again, moving into the Segedilya section. Here, Emma showcased her ability to play with both power and delicacy. The loud passages rang out with authority while the soft moments were tender and intimate. She controlled every dynamic with precision, painting a complete picture of Carmen's complex character. As the piece progressed through its various themes, Emma told the entire story of the opera through her violin. The passion, the jealousy, the tragedy. When she reached the final section, based on the dramatic finale of the opera, her playing took on an almost desperate quality. Carmen's fate was sealed, and Emma made the audience feel every moment of that inevitability. The technical fireworks in the ending were extraordinary. Rapid-fire scales flew by with crystal clarity. Double stops rang out perfectly in tune. Harmonics sparkled like stars. Emma's left hand moved so fast it seemed impossible. Yet every note was precise and intentional. She finished with a powerful final phrase that seemed to hang in the air for a moment, before dissolving into silence. The audience erupted immediately. The applause was even louder than the previous week, if such a thing was possible. People shouted "Brava!" and whistled. Some threw flowers onto the stage, a tradition from the old concert halls of Europe. Emma opened her eyes, breathing hard. She had given everything she had. Whatever happened next was out of her control. Margaret was already standing, clapping enthusiastically. Thomas wiped his eyes, overcome with emotion. And Viktor Rostov rose slowly from his chair. He walked to the front of the judge's table, and the audience gradually quieted to hear what he would say. "Last week, I made a terrible mistake," Viktor began. "I judged a young musician before allowing her to show what she could do. I let my own pride and my own past failures cloud my judgment. What happened that night has taught me something important. Sometimes the teacher has more to learn than the student." He paused, looking directly at Emma. "Tonight, you have given us a performance that belongs on the stages of Carnegie Hall or the Royal Albert Hall. Your technical mastery is beyond question. But more importantly, you understand something that many professional musicians never learn. You understand that technique serves the music, not the other way around." Viktor's voice grew stronger, more passionate. "Sarasate wrote this piece to showcase virtuosity, yes. But he also wrote it to tell Carmen's story, to capture her spirit. You did not just play the notes tonight. You became Carmen. You made us feel her joy, her defiance, her tragedy. That is what separates a good musician from a great one." The audience applauded his words. Emma felt like she might faint from the intensity of the moment. "I give you a perfect score," Viktor declared. 10 out of 10. And I apologize again for how I treated you last week. You deserve better then, and you have more than proved yourself now. Margaret and Thomas both awarded perfect scores as well. Emma had achieved something almost unheard of on Classical Stars, a unanimous perfect score from all three judges. After the show ended and the cameras stopped rolling, Victor asked Emma to stay behind. Her parents waited nervously in the hallway as Emma followed the famous maestro to a private room backstage. The room was small and simply furnished with a couch, a few chairs, and a table with bottles of water. Victor gestured for Emma to sit, then took a seat across from her. Up close, without the stage lights and cameras, he looked older and somehow more human. The lines around his eyes were deeper. His hands, which had conducted some of the world's greatest orchestras, showed their age. I want to tell you the full story of what happened to me in Moscow, Victor said quietly. The story I have never told anyone completely. Emma sat perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. I was 19 years old, studying at the conservatory in St. Petersburg. I was considered a prodigy. Everyone said I would be the greatest conductor of my generation. But first, I had to prove myself as a violinist. The Moscow audition was for a position in their symphony orchestra. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. Victor looked down at his hands as he spoke. I chose Paganini's 24th Caprice because I wanted to show off. I wanted everyone to see how talented I was. I practiced until my fingers bled. I could play every note perfectly in my practice room. But when I walked onto that stage and saw the judges looking at me, I froze inside. He took a breath before continuing. I played the piece exactly as I had practiced it. Every note was correct. Every tempo was precise. But it was dead. Lifeless. I was so afraid of making a mistake that I made the biggest mistake of all. I forgot to make music. I was just reproducing sounds. Emma listened, seeing her own fears reflected in his story. The lead judge was a famous violinist named Dmitri Oistrakh. After I finished, he said something I will never forget. He said, "Young man, you play like a computer that has been programmed to produce correct notes." But Paganini did not write this music for computers. He wrote it for human beings with human hearts. Victor's voice grew rough with emotion. I was devastated. I had worked so hard, practiced so many hours, and I had failed. Not because I lacked skill, but because I lacked courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to risk mistakes in pursuit of something real. He looked up at Emma. When I saw you last week, standing on that stage with your grandfather's violin, I saw myself at 19. I saw someone who was about to make the same mistake I made. So I tried to stop you before you could experience that humiliation. But I was wrong. You were not me. You had something I lacked at that age. You had the courage to feel the music instead of just playing it. Emma felt tears forming in her eyes, understanding the weight of what he was sharing. After Moscow, I spent 6 years rebuilding myself as a musician, Victor continued. I studied with great teachers. I traveled the world. I listened to folk musicians and jazz players and rock guitarists, anyone who played with genuine emotion. I learned that technique is just a tool, a way to express what's in your heart. The heart is what matters. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. Eventually, I became a conductor because I realized that was my true calling. I could help other musicians find their voices the way I had found mine. But somewhere along the way, I forgot that lesson. I became hard and critical. I focused on perfection instead of passion. I became the judge who destroyed me in Moscow. Victor turned back to Emma. Until last week, when a 17-year-old girl reminded me what music is really about. When you continued playing after I stopped you, when you let go of your fear and just trusted the music, you showed me something I had forgotten. You showed me courage. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. This is my personal contact information. I want to offer you something. I am the principal conductor for the San Francisco Symphony. We have a young artists program that provides training and mentorship to exceptional musicians. I would like you to join that program. Full scholarship, including private lessons with the best teachers in the country. Emma's hands trembled as she took the card. She could barely process what was happening. You do not have to answer now, Victor said. Talk to your parents. Think about what you want. But know this, Emma, you have a rare gift. Not just your technical ability, which is impressive, but your emotional honesty. That cannot be taught. That comes from somewhere deeper. Emma found her voice, though it shook slightly. Thank you, maestro. I don't know what to say. Say nothing now. Just promise me something. Victor's expression grew serious. Promise me you will never let anyone, including me, make you doubt your gift. What you have is precious. Protect it. Nurture it. Share it with the world. Emma nodded, unable to speak through the tears streaming down her face. Victor smiled, a genuine warmth replacing his usual stern expression. Now go. Your parents are probably worried. Tell them that Victor Rostov said their daughter is going to be one of the great violinists of her generation. Emma stood and shook his hand again, then left the room in a daze. Her parents rushed to her, asking 100 questions at once. She could only show them Victor's business card and repeat what he had said. The news of Emma's perfect score and Victor's unprecedented offer spread quickly. The next episode of Classical Stars, which featured Emma's second performance, became the highest-rated episode in the show's history. Over 30 million people watched it, and the video was shared across every social media platform, but the real impact went deeper than ratings and views. Music teachers around the world used Emma's story to inspire their students. They talked about how she had faced harsh criticism with grace and turned it into motivation. They discussed how she had succeeded despite not having expensive advantages or elite training. Young musicians who couldn't afford private lessons found hope in her example. If Emma Chun could teach herself through dedication and online videos, maybe they could too. Practice rooms in schools and homes around the globe filled with students working harder. Inspired by a 17-year-old girl who refused to give up, Emma's story also sparked a broader conversation about teaching methods in classical music. Some educators defended the harsh, critical approach, arguing that it prepared students for the competitive reality of professional music. Others argued for a more supportive, nurturing style that encouraged creativity and emotional expression. Victor himself became part of this conversation. In interviews, he spoke openly about how Emma had changed his perspective on teaching. He admitted that fear-based criticism might produce technically proficient musicians, but it often crushed the very qualities that made music meaningful. Several weeks after the show aired, Emma started attending the San Francisco Symphony's Young Artists program. She worked with world-class teachers who helped refine her technique while encouraging her natural musicality. But the most valuable lessons came from Victor himself. He invited her to observe his rehearsals with the orchestra, teaching her how to understand music from a conductor's perspective. He showed her how different instruments work together to create a unified sound. He explained the importance of listening, not just playing. During one of their private lessons, about a month into the program, Victor asked Emma to play something for him without any preparation. Just pick up your violin and play whatever comes to your heart right now, he instructed. Emma hesitated. She was used to practicing pieces for weeks, analyzing every measure, perfecting every phrase. The idea of playing something spontaneously felt terrifying. I don't know what to play, she admitted. That is the point, Victor said gently. You always know what to play when you have had time to prepare and analyze and memorize. But what about when life surprises you? What about when you need to express something that has no written music? Emma lifted her grandfather's violin, still her instrument of choice despite offers to use more expensive alternatives. She closed her eyes and let her fingers find the strings. What emerged was not a classical piece or a famous composition. It was a melody that seemed to come from deep inside her, a musical expression of everything she had experienced over the past months. The melody was simple at first, just a few notes that repeated and evolved. It spoke of her childhood in the small apartment, her parents' sacrifices, the smell of the restaurant kitchen where her family worked. Then it grew more complex, expressing the fear and excitement of auditioning for Classical Stars, the humiliation of being stopped mid-performance, the triumph of finding her courage. Victor listened without interrupting. When Emma finally lowered her violin, she was surprised to see tears on his weathered face. That, he said softly, is what I have been trying to teach musicians for 40 years. You just did it naturally. Do you know what you played? Emma shook her head. You played your truth. No composer wrote those notes. They came from your own experience, your own heart. That is improvisation in its purest form. That is jazz musicians do what folk singers do. What all the great musicians do when they stop trying to be perfect and start trying to be honest. He stood and paced the room, energized by what he had just heard. Classical music has lost touch with this, Victor continued. We spend so much time trying to interpret what Mozart meant or what Beethoven wanted that we forget to ask what we ourselves want to say. The notes on the page are just a starting point, a conversation between the composer and the performer. But too many musicians treat them like sacred texts that cannot be questioned. Emma thought about this. But isn't that disrespectful to the composer? Shouldn't we try to honor their intentions? Of course, Victor agreed. But the best way to honor them is to bring their music to life in a way that speaks to people today. Beethoven did not write his symphonies so that people 200 years later could reproduce them exactly as he imagined. He wrote them to express something urgent and necessary about the human experience. Your job as a performer is to find that urgency in your own time, your own way. This conversation opened new doors in Emma's understanding of music. She began to approach even the most traditional classical pieces with more freedom, asking herself what she wanted to communicate rather than just how to play the notes correctly. Her progress was remarkable. Within 3 months, she was performing as a soloist with the youth orchestra. Within 6 months, she was invited to play with the main San Francisco Symphony in their community concert series. Each performance showed growth not just in technique but in artistic maturity. But success brought new challenges. The attention from her viral performance had not faded. She received daily messages on social media, some supportive and others critical. People had strong opinions about her playing, her choices, even her appearance. Some classical music purists criticized her for being too emotional, too modern in her interpretations. Others praised her for bringing fresh energy to traditional repertoire. Emma struggled with the pressure of constant public scrutiny. She was still just a teenager trying to figure out who she was while the whole world seemed to be watching and judging. There were days when she wanted to quit, to go back to being anonymous, to play music just for herself again. During one particularly difficult week, when a harsh review from a prominent critic had left her feeling crushed, she went to Victor for advice. They say I lack the discipline of properly trained musicians, she told him, her voice breaking. They say my emotional approach is immature and that I rely on passion because I don't have the technical foundation. Victor listened patiently, then asked a simple question. Do you believe them? Emma thought about it. I don't know. Maybe they're right. Maybe I am just faking it with emotion because I don't have real skill. Victor stood and walked to the piano in the corner of his studio. He played a simple scale, each note perfectly even and precise. Then he played the same scale again, but this time with subtle variations in dynamics and timing that made it come alive. Both of those were correct, he said. Both followed the notes on the page. But which one would you rather listen to? The second one, Emma admitted. Critics will always find something to criticize. That is their job. Some of them are wise and can help you grow. Others are frustrated musicians who never had the courage to perform themselves. The question is not whether they are right or wrong. The question is what serves the music and what serves your own growth. He sat beside her on the bench. You do need to keep developing your technical skills. There are always new things to learn, new challenges to master. But never let anyone convince you that emotion is a weakness or that passion is immature. Those are your greatest strengths. They are what made people remember you when a million other violinists were forgotten. Emma wiped her eyes. How do you deal with criticism after all these years? Victor smiled sadly. I still struggle with it. Every conductor, every performer does. You want to believe the good reviews and dismiss the bad ones, but your brain does the opposite. The criticism sticks with you while the praise fades away. The only solution I have found is to remember why I make music in the first place. Why do you? Emma asked. Victor thought for a long moment. Because music is the only language that can express certain truths that words cannot reach. Because in a world full of division and conflict, music can create moments of shared humanity. Because when I stand in front of an orchestra and we create something beautiful together, I feel connected to something larger than myself. He looked at Emma. Why do you make music? Emma thought about her grandfather's violin, about her parents working late into the night, about the feeling she got when a difficult passage finally clicked, about the faces in the audience when she played from her heart. "Because it's the only way I know how to say thank you," she answered. "Thank you to my family for their sacrifices. Thank you to everyone who helped me. Thank you to the music itself for existing. When I play, I feel like I'm part of something that has been passed down through generations. My grandfather played this violin. Someday, maybe someone else will play it. We're all connected through these sounds." Victor nodded slowly. "Then that is all that matters. Play for that reason. Let the critics say what they will. You are part of a tradition that is bigger than any review or any competition." This perspective helped Emma navigate the increasing demands of her growing career. She learned to filter criticism, taking what was useful and releasing what was destructive. She continued to work hard on her technical development, while never losing sight of the emotional core that made her playing special. 1 year after her appearance on Classical Stars, Emma received an invitation that would change everything. The Vienna Philharmonic was hosting a special concert celebrating young musicians from around the world. They wanted Emma to perform as one of the featured soloists. The concert would be held in the famous Musikverein, one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. Even more significant, Viktor Rostov would be conducting the orchestra for this special event. Emma accepted immediately, though the magnitude of the opportunity terrified her. This was not a television competition or a community concert. This was the real thing, the kind of stage that professional musicians spent their entire lives dreaming about. For the concert, she would perform a violin concerto that required her to play with the full orchestra. Victor suggested Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor, a beloved piece that balanced technical challenges with deep emotional expression. The preparation was intense. Emma worked with Victor multiple times per week, studying every aspect of the concerto. They discussed phrasing, dynamics, how to blend with the orchestra while still standing out as the soloist. Victor was demanding but never cruel, pushing her to excellence without breaking her spirit. "Remember," he would say during their sessions, "you are not competing with the orchestra. You are having a conversation with them. Listen to what they say and respond with your voice." 3 weeks before the concert, Emma's mother fell ill. Nothing serious, the doctors said, just exhaustion from working too many hours. But it was a wake-up call for the whole family. Emma's success had opened doors and created opportunities, but her parents were still working themselves to exhaustion at the restaurant. Emma made a decision. She used the prize money from Classical Stars and the fees from her recent performances to pay off her parents' debts. She convinced them to hire additional help at the restaurant so they could finally rest. Her father protested at first, saying she should save the money for her future. But Emma insisted. "You gave me my future," she told them. "This is just me giving a little bit back." As the date of the Vienna concert approached, Emma felt surprisingly calm. She had worked as hard as she could. She had learned everything Victor could teach her. Now she just needed to trust herself and the music. The day before she was scheduled to fly to Vienna, Victor called her to his studio for one final meeting. When she arrived, she found him sitting at the piano with a serious expression. "I want to tell you something before we go to Vienna," he said. "Something I should have told you months ago." Emma sat down, curious and slightly worried. "Do you remember when I stopped you during your first audition? When I told you that I had failed at performing Paganini when I was 19? Emma nodded. "That was true. But what I did not tell you was what happened after that failure. I was so devastated that I almost quit music entirely. I came very close to giving up on my dream." Victor's voice grew quiet. "There was a teacher at the conservatory, an old violinist named Anna Pavlova. She found me one day, sitting alone in a practice room, crying. She asked me what was wrong, and I told her everything. How I had failed, how I was not good enough, how I should just give up." He paused, lost in the memory. "Do you know what she did? She picked up her violin and played Paganini's 24th Caprice for me. She was 70 years old, with arthritis in her hands. She could not play all the notes perfectly anymore. But she played with such heart, such understanding of the music that I forgot about the technical imperfections. She made me understand that music was not about being perfect. It was about being present." Victor looked at Emma. After she finished, she told me something I have never forgotten. She said, "Victor, you did not fail because you lacked talent. You failed because you were not ready to be honest. Come back to this piece when you have lived enough to understand what Paganini was really trying to say. Come back when you have failed and struggled and loved and lost. Then you will play it properly." Emma felt chills running down her spine. "I never got the chance to play Paganini for her again," Victor continued. "She died 2 years later. But I think about her words every time I conduct, every time I teach. She taught me that music is not a competition to see who can play the most notes correctly. It is a way to share the human experience." He stood and walked to Emma, placing his hands on her shoulders. "When you continued playing that day on Classical Stars, after I had humiliated you, you reminded me of what Anna Pavlova taught me. You reminded me that courage and honesty matter more than perfection. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." Tears rolled down Emma's cheeks. "So tomorrow, when we stand on that stage in Vienna, I want you to remember this. You are not there to impress anyone. You are not there to prove anything. You are there to share something beautiful with people who need beauty in their lives. That is all. That is everything." Emma hugged him, this man who had started as her harshest critic and become her greatest mentor. The flight to Vienna was long, but Emma managed to sleep, conserving her energy for the performance ahead. When she arrived, the city took her breath away. Historic buildings lined the streets. Music seemed to float through the air itself. This was the city of Mozart and Beethoven, Brahms and Mahler. The weight of that history was both inspiring and intimidating. The music Vereen was even more beautiful than they pictures Emma had seen. Gold leaf decorated the ceiling. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead. The acoustic was legendary, designed to carry every nuance of sound to every corner of the hall. The orchestra rehearsal went smoothly. The professional musicians treated Emma with respect, following Victor's lead. They worked through the concerto section by section, finding the balance between soloist and ensemble. Victor conducted with passionate precision, drawing out the best from everyone. On the night of the concert, Emma stood backstage in a simple black dress, holding her grandfather's violin. She could hear the audience filing into the hall, their voices creating a low murmur of anticipation. Other young musicians were performing earlier in the program, but Emma would close the concert with the Mendelssohn Concerto. She watched from the wings as the other performers took their turns. A pianist from Japan played Chopin with crystalline clarity. A cellist from Brazil brought fire and passion to Dvorak. A trumpet player from South Africa made his instrument sing with joy. Each was talented, each had their own story. Each deserved to be there. Finally, it was her turn. Victor appeared beside her just before she was to go on. "Remember," he whispered, "you are not here to be perfect. You are here to be present." Emma nodded, taking a deep breath. Then she walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely as she took her position in front of the orchestra. She could see thousands of faces looking back at her from the ornate balconies and floor seats. But she did not let herself think about them. She thought instead about why she was there. She thought about her grandfather, whose violin had carried music across an ocean. She thought about her parents who had sacrificed everything so she could pursue her dreams. She thought about Victor, who had learned to transform criticism into mentorship. She thought about Anna Pavlova, the teacher she had never met but whose wisdom had shaped her journey. She thought about every young musician who had watched her videos online and found the courage to keep practicing. Every student who did not have money for expensive lessons but refused to give up. Every person who had ever been told they were not good enough but decided to prove otherwise. Victor raised his baton. The orchestra prepared. Emma lifted her violin, and then she played. The Mendelssohn Concerto flowed from her, with a freedom she had never experienced before. Every note was infused with purpose. Every phrase told a story. She listened to the orchestra and responded, creating a true conversation between solo violin and ensemble. The difficult passages that had worried her in practice became opportunities for expression rather than obstacles to overcome. In the slow movement, Emma poured all her gratitude into the music. The beautiful melody spoke of love and loss, hope and longing. She thought about everyone who had helped her reach this moment, and her violin sang their praises. The final movement was joyful and exuberant. Emma and the orchestra drove toward the conclusion together, building energy and excitement. Her fingers flew across the fingerboard. Her bow arm moved with strength and grace. She was completely present, completely alive in the music. The final chord resonated through the perfect acoustics of the music varying, then faded into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the audience exploded into applause. People leaped to their feet, shouting and cheering. The orchestra musicians tapped their bows against their music stands, the highest compliment one musician can give another. Victor turned to Emma with tears streaming down his face, applauding along with everyone else. Emma bowed deeply, overcome with emotion. This was not about winning a competition or getting a perfect score. This was about sharing something meaningful with people who understood and appreciated it. This was music in its purest form. As she walked off stage, her grandfather's violin still in her hands, Emma realized that her journey was just beginning. There would be more performances, more challenges, more moments of doubt and triumph. But she was ready.